Hello and welcome to Comprehension Points video Snark. I'm making my way through Fallen by Lauren Kate. If you haven't seen the other videos, you might want to do that before jumping into this one, or else you might be confused. Links will be posted below. Chapter 6. Early the next morning, Randy comes over the school-wide intercom to announce that they're doing a weekly fitness test. Luce is just angry that they're doing this at 6:30 a.m., but also at herself for having stayed out so late. And I'm baffled because you'd think that a curfew would be the first thing that the author would have thought of, but I guess not. Following having overheard Daniel and Gabby talking, Luce's overactive imagination wouldn't stop providing her pictures of the two of them kissing. She worked herself into an anxious frenzy. She'd return to her room after that, unable to face anybody else right then. As Luce gets ready, she worries what Randy meant by fitness test. She pictures various torturous gym activities. In front of the church-turned-gymnasium, Luce meets up with Penn, who is wearing running shoes and a tracksuit. Luce is worried that she missed some memo about appropriate gym clothing, but then is relieved when she realizes that she's not the only one who's not exactly dressed for physical activities. Penn is in a bad way, claiming that she karaoke'd too hard last night. She's also acting like she's got a hangover. Inside the gym, Randy then starts telling the students where they need to go. Luce is given the pool and is issued a stretched-out swimsuit. Luce's only consolation about the suit is that at least it looks clean. Penn is also assigned the pool, but to Luce's dismay, so is Gabby. The girls' locker room basically is, well, let's just say that the entire building is an old church. They might have converted it into a gym, but most of the church decorations remain. Penn says that they did an insanely half-hearted job to convert it, and goes on to say that every summer the headmaster asks her to help redecorate the place, but Penn is of the opinion that removing all of the religious artifacts would somehow offend God. Luce continues to compare this school to her prep school. Gabby also jumps into what Penn was saying and proposes that the school should start by hanging up pictures of recent graduating classes. The teacher shows up and yells at them to hurry. The three of them hustle to where the pool is, and Luce is completely and utterly awestruck by what she finds. Where the main floor of the church originally was, where they gave sermons, is nothing but a giant pool. Luce suddenly understands what Penn was talking about, how the entire thing just seems sort of sacrilegious. Some students are doing their laps, but Luce notes that some of the other named characters are sitting in the bleachers laughing and joking around. Penn says that they always somehow have notes excusing them, but she doesn't know how. Gabby joins them, and Luce just feels bad about the entire situation. The coach then blows a whistle and all of the others jump into the water. The coach then berates Luce, saying that it's a race, which, again, how is she supposed to know any of this? Luce dives into the pool, having been taught from an early age how to be an amazing swimmer. She's doing great up until she somehow or another hears Gabby saying Daniel's name, and then it throws her off. Luce ends up not winning at all, because of a boy. When Luce gets out from the pool, Roland throws her a towel. Luce decides to ask him if Gabby and Daniel are together, but Roland just tells her to ask Daniel. Luce hovers in the doorway to the weight room where Daniel is for a moment, wondering if she should. After all, it's not really much of her own business who those near strangers are dating. But then she watches as Daniel selects a jump rope and starts to use it. First, she's hit with a strange feeling of deja vu that she can't explain. Then she falls into a weird trance as she watches him move. Todd falling on the other side of the room breaks Luce's trance. And then a shadow shows up and touches Luce, which she says is the first time that one of them has actually touched her before. She describes it like hands gripping her arms and shoving her from the room. As she looks back into the weight room, she sees Daniel looking around in confusion. Luce had cried out when the shadow touched her, and he probably heard it. Luce then dismisses her earlier idea of just asking Daniel. She feels like she already heard enough yesterday. However, as she's going to the locker room, she realizes that she doesn't have her lock key anymore. She then finds it insanely close to Daniel, where she knows that she was not. She goes in because she needs to get her key to change. Naturally, Daniel stops and spins around to face her. He asks if she won, but seems kind of disappointed when she didn't. He starts to say something about how she's always been a good swimmer, but then changes it at the last second to make it sound like he saw her just now and assumed that she would win. But when Luce asks him about it, he says some thinly veiled thing about how they always let the new kids win the first race. But Luce points out that Gabby didn't win either, despite the fact that Gabby didn't even get into the water. However, Daniel says that Gabby isn't new, just coming back. Daniel turns to go back to skipping rope, but he calls her back as she's going to leave. She asks if they've met before, and she feels a little crazy. He makes a tacky joke about how crazy is why it is that they're all there. Ugh. He also makes a joke about how the Reds monitor for stalkers, which Luce insists that she's not stalking him. She pointedly asks him to tell her that they've never met before, and we end the chapter on that note. And remember how I mentioned in the prologue that I was getting some of the Immortals vibes from this? Because I'm getting the sense that Daniel knows Luce. Chapter 7. As Luce is trying to get to class later, she almost literally runs into Cam. She'd gone to the dorms to try and get a hot shower since the ones in the gym apparently didn't have any. Because priorities, I guess. This means that she's late for class. She knows that she should apologize to Cam for having ditched his party the night before, but she feels like right now she has more things to think about. However, as she looks at Cam, she kind of wonders why it is that she cares so much about Daniel. And then the book takes a moment to remind us that Cam is still hot, because I guess that we might have forgotten while the book was tripping over itself to remind us that Daniel was still hot. Love triangles are exhausting. How am I supposed to keep track of which love interest is the hottest if the main character keeps switching her attention from one boy to the next? Ugh. Cam has a coffee and Luce almost wants to ask him where he got it. He tells her that at Sword and Crest it's better not to show up for classes at all than to be late. He says that he got them a picnic lunch, and Luce suddenly realizes that she never even had breakfast, and besides, it's only 20 more minutes of the morning block, and she doesn't want to get yelled at by the teacher. And at this point, I just want to pause and say, girl, why did you take hours in the shower? She wasn't even in the pool for a full hour, and yet she ended up taking longer in the shower than she was in the pool. I get that pool water is icky, but still, get some priorities. Cam wants to go to the cemetery for their picnic lunch. When Luce asks if he'll save her from any more statues, he makes an insanely bad joke that no, he will not. And then he has to explain his joke because no more statues are going to fall over. The statue that had fallen over has since been removed, leaving only the pedestal where it originally stood. As they're walking through the cemetery, Luce half trips and leans on a headstone to catch herself. Cam says that the headstone is his favorite. It's some Confederate soldier, and it describes in great detail how he died, which is honestly a little weird if you ask me, but whatever. Luce compares the headstone to Trevor's, which just has what I can only assume to be a generic headstone phrase on it. After that, they start to try and make up stories about how the other people died. This cheers Luce up a bit, and she feels like she's finally starting to fit in. They dig into the food camp rat, which is a lot of stuff. Luce asks what he was planning to do if he hadn't run into her, but he says that he barely even remembers his life before Luce came along, but in a joking sort of way. He says that he sometimes works in the school cafeteria. He says that the payoff is that he gets run of the pantry so he can do stuff like this. However, he also sometimes gets bad grease burns. Luce touches one of them on his arm in a way that's not bogged down with sexual tension at all. Nope, none of that here. Yes, I'm being sarcastic. However, when Luce questions why he decided to take her to the scenic cemetery for a picnic, he says that she's the one who brought up romance. But Luce's mind is preoccupied with thoughts of Daniel. Because of course it is. Cam says that where he grew up, the school isn't that much different. He says that Luce must have grown up in a nicer home. She thinks about how her parents would drag her to doctors and about the shadow. She instantly decides that Cam clearly had it worse without even knowing any more details about Cam's childhood. A snake decides to slither by. Cam has to tell the frightened Luce that so long as she doesn't do anything, the snake will leave. And now we're apparently borrowing subplots from Born at Midnight. Cam then stares into Luce's eyes and runs his fingers through her hair. Luce can't take her eyes off from his lips. They're starting to inch closer to one another, and Gabby shows up because we can't jump into a relationship right now. Gabby says that she is looking all over for them. Luce feels like the relationship between Gabby and Cam is more like siblings, but Gabby eventually gets to her point, that she was sent to find Luce by one of the teachers, so that the teacher was upset when Luce failed to show up for her morning block classes, and that Luce seemed like a promising student. When Luce gets to the computer lab, the librarian/teacher just tells her which computer to use, nothing about how she'd missed classes that morning. Luce goes to her assigned computer and spots Daniel, and gets embarrassed as she thinks about their encounter that morning. Even after nearly sharing a kiss with Cam, Daniel is the only person Luce can think about. However, she knows that Daniel is never going to happen. This much she feels is clear from their encounter in the weight room earlier. The teacher then gives them permission to use the internet to begin building their family tree. She wants for them to go back 6 generations, but expects for them to do all of this in 20 minutes, which I was into my own genealogy for a while, curious about where I'd come from. And sure, once I got back far enough, I was able to connect to other descendants whom I'm distantly related to, who had done most of the legwork, but getting started can be insanely difficult, especially if you can't even ask your parents when and where their parents were born. But why do I get the feeling that this school research project is going to become super important to the plot? Daniel acts kind of weird about the entire thing, but only just says that it should be interesting. The teacher chooses to take this as a good sign. She also signs on my research paper and what they find, a 10 to 15 page paper, which literally nobody is going to know if you made stuff up or not. Nobody. Was my 5 times great uncle a polygamist who abandoned 3 wives, as well as the Confederacy? You don't know that. And how does Luce feel about doing schoolwork? I'm glad that you asked. She would rather think about Cam and Daniel. Because, of course, she eventually decides that she should focus on Cam and forget about Daniel, especially because, he's the one who's actually into her. Luce wants to call Callie and talk about this, but she can't. Someone said she has to actually focus on her work. Thanks for listening to my Book Snark on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and be here next Monday. Don't forget to check out my other video snark series. If you're new here, then I also run a Tumblr where I post daily book snarks. I also have a Patreon where I post early releases of my daily snark, but also bonus snark that isn't up anywhere else. Plus, all supporters get a big shout out. Thank you so much to Don and Phoebe for supporting me already. You can hear your name next week by joining my Patreon for $1 a month. However, since it is a recurring charge, I also accept PayPal and Ko-fi. Also, if you want to read some of the stuff that I've published, then you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have 17 erotic short stories, 1 short story collection, and 1 full-length novel. Links for all of these things will be posted below. See you next week, guys. In front of the church turned the girls' locker room is the girls'